Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Good morning, Tampa Bay. Boy, on this another beautiful day here in Tampa. Nice, cool day. Good weather.
Let me tell you something. It is a beautiful day. Not a beautiful day in traffic. You would have thought, or I did think after the Super Bowl last night, so many people would have called in from work. It looked like it was Black Friday out there as far as traffic on the roadways. Everybody rushing somewhere. Accidents all over and
it's the longest I've ever spent on the roads to get here in the morning. Right. I spent over an hour just to get here.
Yep. I think what happened, all of the social media, all of the news reports about everybody's taking Monday off. The bosses said, I expect to see you here Monday.
Or maybe everybody was just running a little bit late. They normally get into work earlier.
Yeah,
and then they were running a little late, and they're all on the roads at the same time. I mean, it was terrible trying to come across.
Normally Tuesdays are like today.
Yeah.
So tomorrow is going to just be, another Monday. It's a shame you don't have anything to talk about today.
Oh, boy, we got lots to talk about, Pat George. You know that. We always got plenty to talk about.
Even when there's not, you do, but I'm telling you, it is a busy week.
Yeah, it is going to be a big week this week. And, of course, we had the Super Bowl last night. Did you watch it?
I watched, here's what I did. I fell asleep when Terry Bradshaw started talking right before halftime.
Yeah.
Right before they're getting, the field set up. I fell asleep, and then I woke up in the middle of the fourth quarter.
Well,
so I went to sleep. It was 10-10. I woke up, and it was like 30-20 or something. So apparently, I missed the halftime show. I missed the whole third quarter.
I missed the whole thing. I hate to say. Well, I don't hate to say. I mean, I'm just not interested in it anymore.
My son, he's home now. My son came home for a leave for 2 weeks. He's doing recruiting. He was just arguing with me the whole time to turn it off. He could care less about that.
Yeah. Well, I heard the halftime show was pretty risque.
Yeah.
They had pole dancing, and I saw a couple of, short clips of it. And it, as they have been doing, they've been getting more and more risque with the dress.
Let's just put it this way: if you like country music, that was not the show for you.
Well, I did see that Jeb Bush posted on Twitter that it was the best halftime show ever. And I thought, with the NFL and what they're doing allegedly doing with Human Trafficking Project and being anti-exploitation of women, and then they've got a halftime show that's all about the exploitation of women. They've got a pole, I think Jennifer Lopez, I saw her doing pole dancing. And who was the other one that was there at the halftime show?
Shakira.
That's right. I was trying to remember what her name was. And I saw her doing her tongue in a funny... Anyway, it just... Look, I get showmanship. I totally get showmanship. But I also get having a little bit of class. And, it just doesn't seem to be part of the program for the NFL. And so you look at objectification of women and human trafficking... And they are talking out of both sides of their mouth when they're supporting, the Human Trafficking Project and those efforts on the one hand, but on the other hand, they're exhibiting women like objects.
Yeah, there are a lot of young girls watching that show. Mm-hmm. So you know what music they want to listen to, or they're going to want to dress, or who they're looking up to.
Yeah, right.
So I thought of that after I watched some video clips of it.
Yeah. Well, another thing I heard happened, and I had to just go watch sort of the clips on Twitter and stuff after the fact to pick up on this, since I didn't even put the TV on. I didn't watch it at all. I was reading a book.
I'm sure
I'm one of
only
the few.
The 10 you're going to read this week, probably.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm one of the few. But I thought let me put the time to good use, as opposed to wasting it on this sort of entertainment programming. But I also saw that Beyonce and Jay-Z, who I guess they had some part in the programming. I don't know exactly what part, but I guess they had some part in it. Maybe not. And,
I didn't see it.
Yeah, I mean, they apparently made the point to sit down for the national anthem.
What?
Yeah, as is popular nowadays. They made the point to sit down.
I did not know that.
Yep, and there's video of that.
Beyonce
and Jay-Z. And, it's embarrassing. It's absolutely embarrassing. These people who have made a fortune in the United States of America because of our freedoms, because of our system, because of our people, and they can't bear to stand up for the flag.
Just had a caller that agreed with us, and then started hearing about Beyonce sitting down and just said, I'm through, and hung up.
And they hung up. I think you got them on hold, don't you? Are you sure they hung up?
Yeah. No, when it's gone.
When they said they're through, do they mean they're through with us? They're through with hearing about it, or they're just tired? They're sick and tired of this.
They're sick
crud.
and tired of this. Yes.
Yeah.
That's the way they exhibited that.
Right. Well, look, we totally understand. That's how we feel too. I don't know what the problem is. I don't understand why you can't stand up for the flag. I mean, find another way to protest whatever the issues are that you have. Find another way. But when it comes to the flag, the number of people who have fought and died overseas for the flag, they deserve the respect.
I did not hear any of this on social media, anywhere on anything about them sitting down.
Well, it's probably been somewhat censored. I mean, the thing about the media, the mainstream media, the lamestream media, whatever you want to call it, and even now social media, is everything is being censored. And we're going to talk some about that a little bit later today, because we got so many stories that the truth is not getting out there. And I saw one over the weekend, in the paper on Sunday, where PolitiFact wades into the whole coronavirus issue. And they want to make sure that you understand that PolitiFact has decided that some of these stories that have been out there about the coronavirus, and in particular, they pointed to one in a what they call a blog, but called Great Game India, that talked about the origins potentially of this novel coronavirus 2019 as being possibly from the Wuhan Virology Institute. We talked about that in our Out There last week. I mean, I'll tell you what, if you're watching the news, you see everybody's following along to what we said last week. Of course, we weren't the originators of that concept, and we also were able to find information on that on the internet. Now, we're not saying for sure that's what happened. We're just saying, these are questions that need to be asked, and we're not buying into the standard line that this came out of some, seafood or wet meat market in Wuhan. That's not supported by the evidence, and there are even studies on that. There are even studies on the origins of this that establish that it didn't come from that market that we mentioned.
But isn't the test laboratory pretty close to that area?
Yeah, it's about 20 miles away, we told you last week. Yep. So now as the coronavirus grows, we're seeing, but my point is, and one of the points I have, is that you look at PolitiFact, and they've already decided, they're already out in front saying that's false. What you're saying that it could have come from this, that's been debunked, that's false. No, the truth is it hasn't even been looked into. Just like the stories on the Hunter Biden corruption in Ukraine, they want to say it's debunked when there's been no investigation, there's been no looking into it. But I was glad to hear we have a U.S. senator on our side of things. I don't know if you heard that, and this is kind of what we're taking a quick look back at, although it's going to be a little bit longer than quick, and that's the coronavirus issues. But last week, Tom Cotton spoke in the U.S. Senate about some of these issues when he was questioning some military generals, admirals, etc., about the military response to this. And he said some things that, frankly, I was like, is Senator Cotton listening to the Morgan Streetman show? Is he hearing us out? And he supports sort of what we have said about it. Now, the thing is, I'm running a little bit tight on time now, so I'm not going to be able to get into the first clip, and you want to listen to these in order. But when we come back from the break, we're going to get into those Tom Cotton clips, because I've got several of them, and I think it's worth hearing what he had to say about it. And, of course, he finishes up with a discussion of the potential for creating a vaccine, and we'll get into some of that as well.
Do you think it's only going to get, we know it'll probably get worse, but really bad?
Well, we're going to have to wait and see. 360 people are reported to have been killed, and I think there's a lot of reason why you may not trust.
By the way, it was 170 on Friday.
Yeah.
That was the number they were saying Friday.
Yeah, so it's increasing significantly, at least on a curve. But that being said, what reason do we have to believe that it's only 360?
Do you believe that?
Well, I don't. Look, here, let's just say as a rule, I'm not trusting the information that's coming out of China, because it's a controlled economy, it's a controlled system, it's a controlled media. But heck, we got a controlled media basically in this country, and that's kind of what we're talking about. PolitiFact's already come out and said it's false. It's been debunked. It didn't come from that Institute of Virology. Zero Hedge, a really good website for getting us some alternative views on things and some other ways to look at things and ways to keep an open mind. And a lot of people don't like Zero Hedge, I guess. And so, they got banned from Twitter just for pointing out this issue that we're talking about, that perhaps this may have come from one of these institutes for virology that exists in Wuhan, that is a level 4 bioweapons lab where they study things like the coronavirus. So we're going to tell you some more about that. We're going to hear from Senator Tom Cotton when we get back. And welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. We're going to jump right back into talking about the coronavirus. And the reason you hear me kind of jumping in there and talking over the music a little bit is because we had a lot to cover. I don't know that we're going to be able to get to it all today. But one of the things I did want to mention to you again is we've got this website, Great Game India, that has already been determined to be false by PolitiFact. And that was printed in Sunday's paper here, the Tampa Bay Times. And what was Great Game India reporting on? They were reporting on a study that was done in the northeastern state of Nagaland in India that potentially points to the Wuhan Institute of Virology as being a source for this coronavirus outbreak. Now, that's a story we sort of mentioned to you last week in our Out There segment, and there is some reasoning behind this. This isn't just something that was said. This is actually a study that was done, and it was done on bats, and it was done on bat hunters in this northeast Indian state of Nagaland, and it basically found the presence of antibodies from the Ebola virus in bats and bat hunters in Nagaland, and there's no reason that should be there. There hasn't been any Ebola virus in that area in India. There's absolutely no reason any of these study subjects should be showing the antibodies of having been exposed to the Ebola virus. So the operating thesis is perhaps this, because that particular state, like I said, the northeast part of India is very close to China. So perhaps these antibodies got into the bat population and then into the bat hunter population because of some kind of experiment on bioweapons that was being done in China, and somehow the bug, as it always seems to do, escapes. It escapes and gets into the bat population. Now, the Indian government's even ordered an investigation into this study. So now we've had PolitiFact declare something to be false, and it looks like there may be more to it than just that. And what research did PolitiFact do to declare all of this false? Well, we can lean back and rely on the fact that a U.S. senator's been talking about this. Okay, so you want to talk about giving it a little bit of credibility. Now, let's hear some of what Tom Cotton had to say, Senator Tom Cotton, last week in the U.S. Senate.
I want to talk about the biggest and the most important story in the world, the Wuhan coronavirus. This coronavirus is a catastrophe on the scale of Chernobyl for China. But actually, it's probably worse than Chernobyl, which was localized in its effect. The coronavirus could result in a global pandemic. While you were all sleeping overnight, the number of diagnosed cases in China increased by 30%. Now, let me be clear, that's not new cases, that is just newly admitted cases. It is probably several orders of magnitude higher than that. Also, while you were sleeping, China now has its entire border with Russia closed. 2,600 miles, Russia has closed that border. El Al has shut down travel between Israel and China. Air France has shut down travel between China and France. And that's in addition to all the other countries that have already shut down travel. From what we know so far, and there's still many unknowns, this virus could have both a long incubation period, as much as 14 days, and individuals could be contagious while asymptomatic, which was not the case with SARS in 2003. Furthermore, from some cases, it appears the virus could be aerosolized, which means it doesn't require the kind of contact that you have with, say, a married couple kissing each other or a family living in close quarters in a hotel or apartment, but rather the distances we are all sitting apart right now. Yet China is still lying about all of this. They've been lying about it from the very beginning, and you don't need their history of lying about SARS in 2003, though it is relevant here. You just have to see what's happened over the last 2 months.
Did you hear what he said? He said you can be contagious while asymptomatic. And that's something that we pointed out to you last week as being one of the issues, and that could potentially point to it having been developed as a bioweapon, although we can't conclude that certainly at this point. We haven't been able to do any research on it, but that's the exact type of characteristic that you'd want to develop in a bioweapon. And we learned so much about the different characteristics that you'd want to develop in a bioweapon from examining that book Bitten, which talked about Lyme disease having been developed by Willy Bergdorfer, who was a bioweapon scientist for many, many years in the U.S. bioweapons program, and looking at what are the characteristics that you would want in a bioweapon, and a bioweapon that can be transferred from person to person before anybody knows they're even sick. That is ideal. Let's hear some more from Senator Tom Cotton.
We now know that the first case manifested no later than December 1, even though China didn't reveal it to the WHO until a month later on December 31st, when they continued to hide it from their own citizens. And they continued to say that it had been contained inside Wuhan. Today, it is in every single province in China.
And apparently we've got 11, and that's just the reported cases in the United States, 11 documented cases, and it's all across the country. And believe me, there are more than that. They just haven't manifested yet, and those people have infected other people. But there's still more to hear about from Senator Cotton.
They also claimed for almost 2 months until earlier this week that it had originated in a seafood market in Wuhan.
Listen to that.
That locals had contracted it from animals in, say, bat soup or snake tartare. That is not the case. The Lancet published a study last weekend demonstrating that of the original 40 cases, 14 of them had no contact with the seafood market, including patient 0. As one epidemiologist said, that virus went into the seafood market before it came out of the seafood market. We still don't know where it originated. Could have been another seafood market. Could have been a farm. Could have been a food processing company. I would note that Wuhan also has China's only biosafety level 4 super laboratory that works with the world's most deadly pathogens, to include, yes, coronavirus.
I mean, this is exactly what we were telling you about last week. So I'm glad to hear that we're not the only ones who are thinking like this, and we've got a U.S. senator who's willing to stand up and talk about the truth and use his brain and apply logic, and isn't just going to be dominated by the media blackout on this kind of information. And it is a blackout. I mean, PolitiFact's saying it's already been debunked, it's false, it's nonsense, don't pay any attention, nothing to see here. Twitter is banning news sites from posting on Twitter just for even mentioning this type of thing. I mean, can you believe that? Just for mentioning this type of theory. Now, Tom Cotton also, and I tell you, he sounds pretty upset about this, and although he doesn't get really emotional, he's not like Morgan Streetman, but he sounds pretty upset about this, and the way that he's talking about it, he says, I mean, this has the potential to become a global pandemic, and of course, that's going to be a really big deal, and it's already been a big deal. In China, I mean, you saw the Chinese stock and commodity markets basically crash over the weekend, down almost 10%. China's decided to extend its Lunar New Year for a week in all provinces and almost 2 full weeks in Hubei, which is the province where most of this is occurring. So they've already extended the Lunar New Year, which should have been over. Now they're extending it to February 10th, and then in Hubei province to February 14th. Meanwhile, China is accusing the U.S. of inciting panic just for talking about this as a potential pandemic. But I want you to hear what Tom Cotton has to say about the need to develop a strategy for dealing with this, and what he says about the amount of effort that is going to take, because you may have seen, it's very, very new news, you may have seen that Gilead Sciences, Inc. is already starting human trials of a vaccine in Wuhan. So let's hear from Tom Cotton about what needs to happen to try and combat this potential global pandemic.
Now, look at China's own actions. They have quarantined 60 million people, 60 million, more than the entire population of our West Coast. They've shut down schools indefinitely. Classes canceled nationwide indefinitely. Hong Kong, a part of China, has basically shut down all travel from the mainland. That's why it is essential that we immediately stop all travel on commercial aircraft between China and the United States. Making exceptions, of course, for American citizens to come back, as we just brought back yesterday, allowing essential trade to flow as long as crews on ships and aircraft are not allowed to go into the general population in America, and making exceptions, of course, for medical personnel to go into China to try to get a handle on this. As a defensive measure, I just say again, it is essential that we shut down all commercial air travel immediately between the United States and China. As an offensive measure, because that probably won't stop it entirely, and because if it becomes a global pandemic, we have to deal with countries with very limited capabilities here. We need a Manhattan Project level effort to work with our best research scientists and laboratories in this country to develop a vaccine as quickly as possible.
The amount of effort that went into the Manhattan Project to develop the atomic bomb, that's the amount of effort we're going to need to put towards this? I mean, I think that's probably a little bit of an overstatement, but that's a lot of effort.
What about the hospital built in how many days if they didn't think this was a big deal?
Exactly. Well, we've already banned air travel, and folks coming to the U.S. who aren't already U.S. citizens who are coming from China or have recently been in China. So we're taking some of these steps, but the question is it too little too late? Has the virus already gotten out in the U.S.? Did part of the Chinese cover-up lead us to not take action swiftly enough to stop this? Well, that's a question we're going to find the answer to in the next couple of weeks as we see how this develops. Stick around on the Morgan Streetman Show. You know, I haven't got to talk about what I did this past weekend, which is go over to Orlando and go to the Federalist Society Florida Lawyers Convention, which was really enjoyable. Got to spend some time with Justice Clarence Thomas, although not personally, but got to hear him interviewed, and he is just such a fascinating man. And I'm hoping I'm going to be able to get to some clips from him that I wanted to share with you, because I also got to see his new movie, Created Equal, and I highly recommend it. I also want to talk some today about impeachment, if I can get to it, and surely I'll be able to. But before we get to that, I wanted to take a local interest moment here and talk about the Hillsborough County Transportation Tax. If you remember that tax, it was one that was approved in a referendum in 2018 by 57% of the voters in Hillsborough County and added a penny to your sales tax. You may have noticed that as you purchase things or gasoline and you see, wow, it's more expensive by a penny per dollar. And that's the 1 cent transportation tax. Now, that tax has faced a lawsuit by Hillsborough County Commissioner Stacy White and also a Hillsborough resident named Bob Emerson. And basically, the lawsuit's premise was initially that the spending provision within the referendum usurped the power to determine how to spend money from the county commission. And that's a pretty good basis on which to have challenged the implementation of this referendum. So good, in fact, that Hillsborough Circuit Judge Rex Barbas agreed with that. But what he did was he removed that spending provision from the implemented tax and left the tax itself. So he removed the part that the voters voted on that was telling the county how it had to spend the tax. Well, you know, that's not particularly fair either when you think about it, because they didn't vote for just a 1% tax, spend it any which way you want. They voted to spend it on certain things. And there's a lot of people in the southeast part of Hillsborough who've got some pretty terrible roads down in the Sun City Center and Ruskin areas. The roads down there are just abysmal. And the folks that live down there have been dealing with that because that part of the county's been growing so fast. You know, they have a lot of trouble getting to the interstate so they can get to work. And so we totally understand why they're upset and they want to do something, whatever they need to do to fix the roads down there. But, of course, that's not what this tax is going to do. Most of this tax is going to go into bringing people into the new downtown corridor that's represented by Water Street. And, of course, Jeff Vinnick, the owner of the Lightning, is the one who's leading the development of all that. But Bill Gates' money's involved also. Now, the reason we're telling you about this right now is the Florida Supreme Court is due to hear arguments on this on Wednesday. So this is going to be a big week. Now, they won't probably make a decision really quickly, but they're going to hear oral arguments on these issues on Wednesday. Now, each side will get 20 minutes to make its arguments. So when you think about an issue of this magnitude, I mean, you really don't get a lot of time in front of the court for oral arguments. But, of course, the positions have been fully briefed in writing, and so oral arguments should just be used to answer a few questions that may remain.
So you mean to tell me when we vote on things, it really isn't going to be the final decision if it is voted in for future things, possibly even?
That's true. I mean, we've got the Constitution, and that does bind us. So it's not just a free-for-all. We can't just vote for anything we want. Now, we could vote to change the Constitution or the county charter and things like that, but we can't change it through a referendum as opposed to going through the proper procedure. Now, we'll have to see what the Florida Supreme Court does, because right now there are only 5 justices currently sitting, because, 2 of them, Justice Luck and Justice Lagoa, have been moved up to the 11th Circuit, which is the federal appeals court that covers our state. And so they're now Judge Lagoa and Judge Luck, and I got to see both of them on a panel this weekend. They're very fascinating people, very, very bright, and I'm sure they're going to do us a great service on our federal appeals court. But the end result of that is it leaves our Supreme Court down 2 justices, so we're down to 5 justices currently sitting. Now, you need to have a majority, so you've got to get to 4 justices to agree, so it may be very difficult. I mean, we'll have to see how things happen to get to 4 justices who want to overturn this transportation tax, overturn the ruling of the lower court of Judge Barbas that the transportation tax itself gets to stand, and he strikes the provisions directing the allocation of the funds. Now, something that caught my eye was there was sort of an op-ed. It says, "Business leaders respect voters' voice on transportation tax," and that was in Sunday's paper, signed by a lot of local CEOs. The CEO of Dex Imaging, Richard Gonsmart, signed it for Columbia Restaurant Group. Joe O'Rourke, the president and CEO of the Mosaic Company, signed it. Tom Pepin, we all know Tom Pepin from Pepin Distributing. The CEO of Casper's Company, which is the big McDonald's owner in the area. Also another big name on there, Mark Mondello, the CEO of Jabil. And a lot of other big names on there as well. We can't read them all to you. There were 41 local presidents and CEOs who signed it, including at the very bottom, Jeff Vinnick, the owner of the Tampa Bay.
Now repeat, they signed it in what direction?
They signed it. They want you to respect the voters, the will of the voters, and leave the transportation tax in place.
Okay, so
that's the purpose of the op-ed. Now, that being said, of course, no judge in there acting appropriately should be considering things like an op-ed or a public outcry or anything like that in making their decision. So, but we'll find out relatively soon how the court's going to decide, and it may be something that happens because they're down 2 justices. So we may see them not overturn the ruling of the lower court that the tax could stand because there aren't enough justices on the court to make that kind of vote. I mean, they've only got to win a couple to uphold the lower court decision, and it's a done deal. And then it's over with. So we'll see. I've looked at the arguments. I think the folks that are challenging the law are right on the law. They're correct on the legal arguments. That being said, we'll have to see what happens. There may be other circumstances that come into play on that. All right, we got a few other things we wanted to cover, and one of them I want to make sure I get to is some stuff about Justice Clarence Thomas, because he is a very fascinating man, one of the most fascinating men in America, one of the most prominent leaders. And the truth is we don't know a lot about him, because unless you've read his book, My Grandfather's Son, which is all about him growing up with his grandfather, who is just a fascinating story, and he's a fascinating man. He was essentially a functionally illiterate man, but he had codes and rules that he lived by that were largely based on things he was taught from the Bible. And he raised Clarence Thomas essentially because of some of Clarence Thomas's history and background. He went to live with his grandparents when he was fairly young, I think about 7 years old. And that's when he really began to blossom. And, of course, Clarence Thomas goes on to college at Holy Cross in Massachusetts, goes on to Yale Law School, and then from there becomes a lawyer with the government, works for Senator Danforth for a while, becomes a lawyer with some government agencies, gets put onto the D.C. Circuit, and eventually put on to the Supreme Court. Now, you'll remember his contentious confirmation hearings, but one of the neat things I got to do is I got to sit for a special screening of his movie, Created Equal, And I see that it's not playing anywhere locally here, and that's a real shame. It's a fantastic movie. It's well worth seeing. I mean, it is absolutely captivating, and I wanted to share with you the trailer because it'll give you a little bit of the sense of the movie, the pacing of the movie. And, of course, one of the best parts of the movie is Justice Thomas's voice, which is got so much in it. You can just almost get a sense from the man just from his speaking voice. So let me play the trailer really quickly here for you.
Judge Thomas, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please be seated.
When I was 6, I wandered the streets by myself. We were hungry and didn't know when you'd eat. Someplace in my life, the road split off. I had gone to the seminary. I had gone to all-white schools. I was never going to be a part of that world. I was never going to be white. The problem is I can never go back completely to the world I came from. We're supposed to be revolutionaries. We were for anybody who's kind of in your face. I saw what I had become, lashing out at every single thing. And then I asked God that if you take anger out of my heart, I'll never hate again. And that was the beginning of the slow return to where I started.
I want my candidacy to unify our country.
I was under constant attack. You're not really black because you're not doing what we expect black people to do.
That I will nominate Judge Clarence Thomas to serve as Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court.
That's when all heck broke loose.
Judge Thomas began to use work situations to discuss sex.
We know exactly what's going on here. This is the wrong black guy. He has to be destroyed. You really didn't matter. What mattered was what they wanted.
So you'd still like to serve on the Supreme Court?
I'd rather die than withdraw from the process. I wanted to be able to say I lived up to my oath and did my best.
Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff.
When I was young and I heard when this happened, I thought he was a bad guy.
Sure. Well, that's how the media wanted you to think.
But then as the years went by and you see everything that's happened and you go, you know what? I don't really believe all of that was the way it was.
Well, most Americans, even at the time, didn't believe it, but I remember it vividly. This happened, of course, in September and October of 1991 was when his confirmation hearing was going on. And he initially basically sailed through the confirmation hearing. And I don't know if you heard at the beginning of that trailer, but the voice that was swearing him in, that was Senator Joe Biden. And Biden was one of the ones leading the charge against Justice Thomas, now Justice Thomas, when he was up for Senate confirmation. Of course, sitting right next to him was Senator Ted Kennedy. There were other senators involved. One of the senators from Alabama, in fact, referred to Justice Thomas in a question as an enigma. And he didn't really say the E part of it. And I mean, to me, there was a definite racial undertone to that. And it was like a slap in now Justice Thomas's face. But he handled it remarkably. I mean, he was amazing. Now, when he came under attack from Anita Hill, that's when things went to the next level. And it's very similar to what happened to Brett Kavanaugh. I mean, we see that was when the pattern was developed. And it's also fairly similar to what's going on with President Trump. The delay pattern dragged things out, let these leaks come out, bring out news stories, just like the Bolton story came out about the book that he's allegedly written. Now, it's second or third hand. First, we got Bolton writing a book. Then it gets leaked, supposedly. Some piece of it gets leaked, probably by Colonel Vindman's brother to the New York Times, who was, by the way, the guy reviewing it. But this delay, and leak out negative stories strategy was really developed and perfected when used against Justice Clarence Thomas. Now, I've got another clip from him that we're going to have to play part of because it's just so meaningful that you got to hear it if you don't remember this, what happened back in October 1991. Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. You know, timing-wise, I can see we're not going to get to do much of an out there today, but, you know, this is worth it. And I want to hold this over and listen to Justice Clarence Thomas, then Judge Thomas's response to the allegations of Anita Hill that he gave to the United States Senate in October 1991 that many of us were watching live. Let's hear from Judge Thomas.
Committee will please come to order. Judge?
That's Joe Biden right there.
It's a tough day and tough night for you, I know. Let me ask, do you have anything you'd like to say before we begin? I understand that your preference is, which is totally and completely understandable, that we go 1 hour tonight, 30 minutes on each side. Am I correct in that?
That's right.
Do you have anything you'd like to say?
Senator, I would like to start by saying unequivocally, uncategorically, that I deny each and every single allegation against me today that suggested in any way that I had conversations of a sexual nature or about pornographic material with Anita Hill, that I ever attempted to date her, that I ever had any personal sexual interest in her, or that I in any way ever harassed her. A second, and I think more important point, I think that this today is a travesty. I think that it is disgusting. I think that this hearing should never occur in America. This is a case in which this sleaze, this dirt, was searched for by staffers of members of this committee, was then leaked to the media, and this committee and this body validated it and displayed it at prime time over our entire nation. How would any member on this committee, any person in this room, or any person in this country would like sleaze said about him or her in this fashion, or this dirt dredged up, and this gossip and these lies displayed in this manner? How would any person like it? The Supreme Court is not worth it. No job is worth it. I'm not here for that. I'm here for my name, my family, my life, and my integrity. I think something is dreadfully wrong with this country when any person in this free country would be subjected to this. This is not a closed room. There was an FBI investigation. This is not an opportunity to talk about difficult matters privately or in a closed environment. This is a circus. It's a national disgrace. And from my standpoint, as a black American, as far as I'm concerned, it is a high-tech lynching for uppity blacks who in any way deign to think for themselves, to do for themselves, to have different ideas. And it is a message that unless you kowtow to an old order, this is what will happen to you. You will be lynched, destroyed, caricatured by a committee of the U.S. Senate rather than hung from a tree.
That's powerful stuff. And it's important to remember that kind of stuff. And think about what you believed at the time. Like Pat George said, a lot of people believed the media hype on all this, and that's certainly what was going on in those hearings, was hype and fodder for the media. And it's just like people believe the hype on the Ukraine impeachment that's been brought against President Trump. It's just like people believe the hype against Brett Kavanaugh, now Justice Kavanaugh. It's just like people for 2.5 years believed the hype on Russia. And, you know, you have to use your logic. You have to think about these things. You have to get other sources of information. You can't just believe what the media tells you, because the media has become mind control.
You can't believe the old saying, where there's smoke, there's fire.
You can't believe that, because where there's smoke coming from the media, there's bull malarkey. That's what the smoke's coming from. It's BS. It's made up. It's fabricated. And it's what we would call propaganda. It's mind control. They're trying to get you to think about things a certain way, and they just keep pumping you full of the BS. And, you know, a lie told often enough becomes the truth. We talk about that all the time on this show. And that's the strategy that they're employing. Now, I want you to think about this in the context also of the impeachment of President Trump. In about 5 minutes, you'll get to start to listen to the closing arguments today. Of course, last week there was a vote to have no new witnesses in the Senate, and people say, oh, there's no witnesses. No, there were 17 witnesses in the House proceedings, but the Democrats called all 17 of them. President Trump got to call zero witnesses in those proceedings. They called 17. 192 video clips they used during the impeachment. They introduced over 28,000 pages of documents, and they got to make 24 hours of arguments against the president. All of that, they still haven't proved their case. Now, I think it's a darn shame that the vote on the final decision of whether to convict or acquit the president is going to occur Wednesday at 4 p.m. And don't think that wasn't done specifically because the State of the Union is coming Tuesday evening. And they wanted to deny Trump the ability to come and give the State of the Union to Congress, having survived this impeachment. And I say this impeachment because I don't believe that this is going to be the last one. I think the Democrats aren't done. They're never done. Look at the pattern. Look at the history. When one Kavanaugh accuser isn't panning out, they start bringing others. Remember that Ramirez lady with those crazy stories? I mean, some of the stuff that came out about Kavanaugh and was featured in the media is absolutely insane. And yet they ran with it. They didn't worry about verifying it. They won't run with anything about Jeffrey Epstein. They've got to verify all that to the nth degree, right? They won't ever run with that. They're
in a week.
Spike those stories, but they'll run with stuff that's completely unfounded when it's about conservatives. And just like Justice Thomas said, he's the wrong black man. President Trump is the wrong president. When you fall into these categories and you don't kowtow to the traditional powers that be in Washington, D.C., the uniparty, the us versus them, where they're in it together in Washington, D.C., and we, the people, are the victims. We're their victims. They're like these fat leeches that have been on our necks for years, growing fat, drinking our blood, taking our money, and making themselves fat and getting these sweetheart deals, getting their children over in overseas business deals where they can get some of this money that's distributed out by USAID and other things. So you got to think about this, and you got to fight the media mind control. Folks, thanks for listening. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it.
Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.